I'm Annette Daniels Taylor, author of Dreams on Fire. Working with young people at the Erie County Youth Detention Center, I met a lot of kids who had issues that were similar to Shaniqua's, with parents being incarcerated or parents being drug users, or they themselves being drug users because of family issues. And I ended up writing a poem about a girl who had an exotic sounding name, and that poem became the basis and the foundation for Shaniqua and Dreams on Fire. And I didn't think when I was writing the poem that I would expand so much on the story. But when I got an opportunity to write a query, I used that poem as the basis, and I realized that I could develop this whole story and life around Shaniqua. So that's where it came from. It was good. I think I'm wondering if it was easier because I'm a spoken word artist. What I do is I'll write the poems and then I'll read them back to myself. I feel that a lot of writers, whether they're spoken word artists or not, do that. I was excited to work on the book because I'm a spoken word artist, and I was thinking about the way young people would read the book and hear the lines in their heads. So I was trying to continue to write the way I would if I was writing a piece to perform in front of an audience, because I feel like they would enjoy that sort of storytelling mixed in with verse that sounds more like rap, and then some that sounds more like prose, and then some that sounds more like song lyrics. So I think being a spoken word artist played into that, the way the book was put together as far as each poem was put together. Oh, that's good. Well, I was thinking recently because Ntozake Shangai passed away a few months ago, and I was thinking about how her work influenced me so much, especially for colored girls, because she, right on the cover of the book, she says, this is a choreo poem. And at first I didn't know what that was as a kid, and then seeing the production, how she mixes choreography with the storytelling, all written in verse. So from an early age, her work influenced me, and especially that text. My other influences would be some more historical poets like Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes. I just love the way Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, and Gwendolyn Bennett and Gwendolyn Brooks, how they use the vernacular in their verse, and it really makes you think of a particular time and place. And I think that reading that work from an early age, I got really interested in reading poetry when I was in third grade, because I got this book from Scholastic that was I don't know what it's called, Negro poems. And I still have it, this paperback. I put it in a plastic Ziploc bag because it was my favorite, and even today I read it, and there are poems in there that are not regularly, published again and reprinted. And so I read it, and it had this great sort of timeline of American poetry written by Black Americans. So those poems really influenced me because of the way they use poetry to tell stories. And I found it really fascinating because I like the fact that, it's succinct. It's like this minimalist way of telling a story using just a certain amount of words. And so to have an editor say, well, I only need you to use these many words, 10,000 words to tell this story. It's like this great challenge. I can do that. I used to like typewriters. I prefer computers. I only use a pen if I'm having a really difficult time writing a poem and I need to connect to the page. Because I think that, I read a long time ago, I don't remember who said this, that writing poetry is much closer to painting or drawing. Writing essays and prose is much more like being a photographer or maybe a graphic artist. So when you're writing prose, it might be easier to use a computer, but when you're writing poetry, it's sometimes easier to use a pen and paper because the creativity is coming right from your brain to your hand. I don't know how true that is, but I can write poems on the computer, but when I'm having a difficult time, I always take out the pen and I'm able to do lyrics and verse a little bit easier, and then I transfer them back to the computer. I like early in the morning when no one is awake and late at night. In my house, because there's 6 of us, it can get really loud and busy in the middle of the day, especially in the summertime. So I like it when it's really quiet, and I like to work at home because I have a little home studio, writing studio in there that is really my space. When I face writer's block, sometimes I stare at the computer a lot, just thinking the muse is gonna hit me. But usually I like to get up and dance, listen to some music, maybe bake some cookies, veg out on Instagram for a long time, or Facebook, see what people are doing, see what other writers are having problems with. And I like that because then it makes me feel like, oh, thank God they're having a problem with that, because that means I'm not crazy or stupid or under a bus. What else? Sometimes if I'm feeling up to it and the weather's good, I'll go ride my bike if I'm having writer's block. Because I heard Chimamanda Ngozi, who wrote Americana, say that most of her time spent writing is spent really doing other things besides writing, like taking walks in her garden, checking out what other people are doing on Facebook, talking to her mom, baking, and thinking about writing. So a lot of times I like to think about writing before I actually write, but that's probably not good for everybody to do. You should probably just dive into it. But I don't always do that. I think there was a lot of Shaniqua, a lot of me in Shaniqua. I think because at the time I was, I grew up in the 70s, 80s, so there were none of the cell phones and instant communication. But I got an opportunity to go to a performing arts school in Manhattan, and so I had to travel every day, bus, boat, and train to get to my destination. And every time I would show up in Manhattan at the school, I was someone different. Because it was, these people didn't really know me. They didn't live in my neighborhood, so I could be different. And I didn't reinvent myself the way Shaniqua did, because my parents weren't incarcerated or estranged. But my father was a nurse, and I recently told someone this. I met some male nurses recently, and I said, "Oh, you guys are so great. When I was a kid and my dad was a nurse, I used to tell everybody he was a doctor." So that was, I never admitted that, my dad was a nurse because I was sort of offended a little by, and I was ashamed, he's a male nurse. I don't really know how to admit that. So whenever I would say, "Oh, my dad's a doctor, my parents are divorced, and I don't really," and I didn't see him that much. So so that was something that I was always lying about regularly. And I was thinking about how, as I got older, how ashamed I was. I couldn't come out and just say or not say. I had to make something up about my father's profession. So, and traveling to Manhattan to like the Upper East Side every day, I would just see like the townhouses and kids going to other private schools in limousines and these beautifully dressed women with their poodles. And I was going to a public school that was just like Julia Richmond, that was like in the middle of all of this this elitism. And so I thought about that when I was writing Shaniqua, like how it felt to travel. And when I was traveling on the bus, boat, and train, I was like trying to think of my new persona, like who I was going to be when I got to Manhattan. And so I used that a lot in trying to, write about her. As far as some of the other things that Shaniqua feels she didn't have or she should have had, I use that too, because I grew up in the projects and my grandmother was a domestic. And so in the summers, I would go visit her. We'd stay the whole summer, and in between going to church every other day, we would go with her to work, and she would clean the homes of these really wealthy white people, and they would have really big homes and a room for everything. There was a breakfast room and a kitchen and a laundry room and a playroom and a pinball room and like 3 or 4 bedrooms and a finished basement and front yard and backyard. And it was just, and I remember telling my mother once when I was about 8 or 9, when I grow up, I'm going to have all kinds of paper products, tissues and toilet paper, napkins, and paper towels. And it was because that's what I saw in all those houses. Like, and every room had little different boxes of, Kleenex tissues. So, and I equated that with being wealthy, like having, So that was something, yeah. So I think that there was always a distinction growing up with me with how people looked and how they sounded and how they dressed. And it was sort of like this segregating line between cultures. And I always thought that there were ways to bridge those lines. And as I grew up and met people who were wealthier or more educated, I could see that we were all just people trying to maneuver the world in our own way. And so, yeah, I related very much to Shaniqua and like changing the way you dress, changing the way you speak, and sort of code switching from group to group so that you can be accepted still in your neighborhood, but accepted in the other community, and keep crossing bridges. Yeah. So, yeah, there was a lot of that in there. Oh, keep working, read lots and lots and lots of poetry and other things that are not related to poetry, and try to see as many poets reading and writers reading as much as you can. You have to read, you have to write, you have to listen, and find someone who you really admire as a writer, and follow them too. Ask questions. Yeah. That's a good question. I hope people take away that everyone has different struggles, and that just because someone's parents don't fit in the mold that someone thinks they should, doesn't mean they're a bad parent. It just means that their struggle is different. When writing this story, I kept trying to figure out how to describe Michael and Lisa and how to portray them as parents that cared, but had so many struggles and pitfalls and walls in their journey that it stopped them from being the people that they thought Shaniqua and Lakeisha needed. So that's where Grandma Cora comes in, because she became the life preserver that those two girls needed in order to survive growing up without their parents in their lives on a regular basis. And she also becomes the link that connects the two daughters to their grandmother, to their parents, I mean. In the 70s and the 60s and in the 80s and the early 90s, there were so many children being raised by grandparents and aunts and uncles and older siblings because their parents had either been incarcerated, lost custody because of drug addiction or alcohol addiction, domestic violence. And just like when someone gets a terminal illness, we often respond with, oh, that's so awful, because in a lot of respects it is. It's so awful when children can't be raised by their parents in the way we imagine that family should be. But the other side of that is sometimes the universe has other plans and other routes for us as individuals in order to reach our goals. And those roots and those experiences that we have on the way to whatever destination we're supposed to get to informs how we react, respond, engage with others, and how we're going to live our lives. And it also helps us become stronger people. And I know that probably sounds a little corny, but I've met so many people, very young, little older, much older than me, talk about the struggles in their journey and look at me now. And I wanted to write a story about Shaniqua, about a person who was having these struggles in their journey and made choices that may not seem like the right choice for most of us, but those choices informed each other choice so that eventually they were able to meet their goal and be proud of themselves, and things worked out. Maybe not the way they had thought, but it still worked out. We spend a lot of time worrying about the future instead of just like living it. And I wanted to show young people, high school students, that even though your family doesn't mirror what someone else's family is, it's still your family, and it's your story, it's your life, and you can make your dreams happen by just going forward. And I think that's what I want. And it might be a big goal that I want people to take away, or a big want to people to take away from this story, but that was basically what it was. I wanted people to know that, you know, there's always opportunity and choice. You just have to find it, and you have to know what it is you want.